The good thing about speaking last or close to the end is that you would have heard everything that everybody wants to say. And it seems all the speakers that preceded me have said everything I would have wanted to say today. And so I have very little to add to what they've already said. Very little, because everybody talks about Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Everybody talks about his vision. Everybody talks about his books. There is so much we can talk about. So much has been said, and it's almost as if there is nothing more to say. We have heard it all, and we've read all the books. We've watched the documentaries. The question now is, what next? Where do we go? And what do we do with the volume of information we have about Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and his vision? The only thing we can possibly do is to carry out his vision to conclusion. That is all. Africa must unite. And the time has come for us to get it done. So, like I was introduced, in the UK, I am the head of the Pan-African Federalist movement. And so I'll be talking briefly about what the movement is all about, what we've been doing, and what we hope to do in the next coming years. It is a fact that all the 55 African states, those small pockets of states, remain non-viable and will remain so until eternity. Because when in 1884 to 1885, the Europeans and other nations met in Berlin to partition the continent, they weren't joking. That meeting lasted 100 days, from November to February. They worked on the details. And so today we have 55 hopeless African countries. Not one single country is better than the other. You have to travel through the whole African continent, it's the same story. It doesn't matter where you go. You come outside of Africa and the black man and black woman we've lost our dignity. We have no respect. And nobody's going to give it to us. We often forget that our independence was not given to us on a silver platter. We fought for it. So who is going to give us a united Africa on a silver platter? We have to go back to the trenches. Now, it is very easy, looking back to when the vision and the mission of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was interrupted in 1966. They obviously had an agenda. They knew the man was a dangerous man. So if they were taking him out, they would put in place measures that would make it impossible for that vision to be achieved. And we bought into all of these things. I like the fact that one of our speakers said that the institutions remain the same. So what if in reality, on the 9th of the 5th or 5th of March 1957, what we have in Africa, in Ghana and Africa, is all that our freedom fighters dreamt of. Then what was the point in the first place? There was no need to go through those sacrifices. Today's convention, you take a look around and you only see the older generation. You won't find our younger generation here because they can't relate to what is going on. They have no understanding whatsoever the struggle that our fathers started and that which we have failed to continue. So in 2015, a lot of tired Pan-Africans came together and decided that, well, something has to be done and somebody must start the job. So there was a call for papers as to how we can overcome or how we can revive the African Unification Project. The call of papers culminated in a pre-conference in Accra in December 2018. It was a well-attended conference. I was there, and so were so many other people, including our own Sister Samia, the children of Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, Bob Marley's grandchildren were all present in the conference. It was a successful conference. We managed to bring on board about 300 African youth from throughout the West African sub-region. It was a caravan. Some came from the north through Burkina Faso, others to Togo, and then Ivory Coast, and they all converged in Accra. And I can tell you on record that those children were amazing. I'm talking about children at the ages of 18 to 22, 23, 24. They had an opportunity to tell us what they think and the kind of Africa they want. Prior to that, I had visited Ethiopia, went to the AU to see, well, initially I wanted to visit the AU library and then see what I could put together. And I walked out of the AU concluding that it is the most useless organization ever established in the history of mankind. It is. And I say that because prior to visiting the AU, I had already visited Brussels, the European Union. I had visited the United Nations just to see how things were done. And if you take the European Union, for example, we've got 33,000 technocrats working at the EU. What can they possibly achieve? You go to the AU, they are less than 1,000. Who funds the AU? The United Nations and donors. Today, every African government and every African administration, they are so good at writing donor reports. Donors and donors and donors. 56 years since the AU was established, we still don't even have one African laboratory that could produce vaccines for African citizens. We don't have it because we don't work together. How do we know the vaccines that is being pumped into our citizens back in Africa? Well, how do we know what they contain? One moment we are told about HIV/AIDS, the next moment we are being told about Ebola, and it all happens only in Africa. So the problems that is facing us are so serious. In fact, the level of work that the colonials did on us is so serious that we've grown to hate ourselves. Africans don't love each other. It's as simple as that. We don't like each other. All of that must change. So we established in Accra the Pan-African Federalist movement. We are working towards a Congress, and we anticipate that the Congress will take place in Ethiopia in about 2 to 3 years' time. We are going to put together every single Pan-African group on the planet. We'll be extending invitations to everyone. Because when we met and sat down and analyzed the situation, we realized there were the one problem that happened during the 1963 encounter in Ethiopia was that it was a gathering of the African leaders, not the African masses. They were legitimate leaders who had gathered to talk about the future of Africa and what to do with their newly gained independence. Some were smarter than others. So obviously, there was a division. In the end, those that didn't want a federation had a day. We can't fault them. They outnumbered those that wanted a federation. But we say the time has come once again to revisit that situation and that question. Which way for Africa? This time, we want the African masses to make the decision. We are going to force every single African government to give their citizens a referendum on that particular subject. It is a Pan-African question, and it is a human right. It is our human right. We want every African government to put it down as a campaign promise to their citizens. Give them a referendum and let them decide whether they want a united federal government or they want to carry on as it is right now. And as it is right now, we all know they have already failed. And so in order to facilitate a balanced and well-organized Congress, the Pan-African Federalist movement is organized in such a way that we have branches in every single country. Wherever the black population has some significant numbers, we create a branch there. So it's a grassroots movement, a grassroots coalition of Pan-Africans. We have in the Caribbean, in the United States, in Latin America, we have branches, regional branches in Europe, and the whole of Africa. We have what we call the NCCs, the National Coordinating Committees, for each country. So each country is supposed to mobilize its own citizens towards the Congress in Ethiopia when it happens. And so when I heard about this convention, I thought it would be important to come and join the brothers here. We are not interested in local politics. We are not interested in too many things. We are interested in only one thing: the unification of Africa politically. That is all we want. And I am telling you today and giving you my word, we shall live to see it happen. We are going back into the trenches. We are going back into the trenches. We are going back to take the African governments on. They have let their citizens down. Power must shift, and power will shift. So I've come to extend to you that brotherly invitation as you continue to project our great father, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Remember, he lived for something. And your brothers are out there working very hard to make sure that that vision is fulfilled. So you join us in pursuit of that one brotherhood and sisterhood. Thank you very much.
When we look at the legacy of people, especially in politics and social reform, you have to ask, how do you assess a legacy? And one possible route is this: to look at the vision of the person, the action of the person, the failings of the person, and the spirit of the person. The vision of the person, from Elder Emmanuel Amevo, told us the great vision of this man. It is the hindsight he had about human society, the insight he had about the colonial reality and imperialism, and the foresight he had about how social justice can be achieved. All of it formidable at the realm of almost genius, you would say. You look at his failings, his mistakes, his mishaps. They were all ordinary. Nkrumah's failings and the worst accusations you would put to him are all ordinary failings, nothing spectacular. You look at his actions, his policies, his programs, his projects. As we've been hearing, you start listing it, you fail because you miss out. I will add in my one that you've missed out: atomic research. His actions are extraordinary. You look at his spirit, and this is where I think his spirit then matters to the future. His spirit, in my own observation, what we find is what I call hyperactivity of the committed, hyperactivity of the progressives. That's what I see. What else do I see in his spirit? That he did not necessarily have time for self-reward. I had the chance, we have Macy, Madam Macy, Madam May Stella, give us testimony, personal testimony. I've had the good fortune to interview several people who knew him. And they said, you know what, if he wasn't encouraged, he wouldn't even get married. Because his reward was the big prize of social justice. You accuse him of so many things, but you could not accuse him of corruption. He had 52 pounds. That's what he had. And a bicycle. He couldn't drive. His reward was this foresight that he had. Now, what can we do with this legacy for the future? Many of the problems that he faced and his work faced came down in the realm of politics and the vulgarity of competition for power. And despite his deep understanding of political philosophy, you would have to say that on the politics, in many cases, his opponents and his enemies beat him. That's why he was overthrown and he died in exile. All that hyperactivity, of course, it's almost impossible if you wanted to list it. How is this possible in a 24-hour day in the 15 years or so that he had control? It's almost impossible. On the African unity, of course, he was not the inventor of the concept, but he took it, he understood how you can translate it. My lesson is that he was pluralist in his approach of getting what is the goal of unity. He was not interested in unity for the sake of unity. But what is the goal of that unity? Because his analysis, as you've quoted, is right. That he's saying it is in this strength of unity that we would have the power to transform ourselves. Today, about 1 billion people, Africa, there are more Chinese and more Indians than Africans on the continent. And outside, we're about 170 million. But if you take the GDP of Africa is roughly the same as the GDP of India. It's about 2.6 trillion based on 2017 numbers. China, of course, is 12.3 billion. It's trillion, so it's 5 times more. But there are 2 other countries that have the same level of GDP. That's France and the United Kingdom. So Germany is $1 trillion, have $1 trillion every year more than all of Africa put together, including Nigeria's 375 billion, South Africa's 350, and Egypt's 235. The only group of countries, so Nkrumah's analysis that size and connection matters is true. But in the past 50 years or so, we have seen that that does not exclude a possibility that you may be small and still successful. Of course, UK and France are not typical examples because they are living on the legacy of theft. But there are countries that have emerged out of that. I am slightly more optimistic than you. For very many years, the African Union, I tried to work with them and I failed, and I didn't waste my time. But in the past few years, I have seen some commitment, some resolve. Of course, they have a framework, 2063. If you see it, it's Nkrumahist. The problem we face almost everywhere is the failure of practice or failure of implementation. And for me, I go back to Nkrumah. All of this achievement we're talking about, the imperialist was undermining it. Guess what? The CIA was on his case. Everybody was on his case. And this guy is performing at superhuman level. So that tells me that I have no excuse to be pessimistic or to be defeatist. It is about getting enough people in different realms, not necessarily only in politics. I've interviewed people who knew Nkrumah. They said, oh, it's not only these big things that mattered to him. People used to bring ideas to him. They said, oh, football is important. He said, but I don't know football. I'm not interested in football. They said, beauty pageants are important. But guess what? He said, if we're doing it, let us be excellent and let us be good. So that's how he walked. So that's the inspiration I take. So the reality where we live now, the nature of the nation state is problematic. Nkrumah knew it. But even before 1884, 1885, the nation state as we know it is the Westphalian model, 1648, about individual sovereignty of small states. And Nkrumah advised us. My youth was spent hearing the echoes of Nkrumah about the problems of Balkanization. Balkanization is a European problem, isn't it? It's the Balkans, spreading up countries to create difficulty for them. The nation state, but what the unity and seeing the bigger picture is actually not natural. It's not instinctive. It's not comfortable. So only civilized people, like my friend here and my brother, want unity. Because it's about moving beyond what's very comfortable. So that aspiration, that aim need to be supported. But I will not wait for unity to achieve the social justice that's required. Just as Nkrumah did not wait for Ghana, Guinea, Mali to work for him to build a Kosombo, to commission atomic research, and to deliver great education for only a small part of what he was interested. In the beginning, I was getting worried that this was going to be a Ghana story, and I was going to disappoint you by saying that Nkrumah is not Ghanaian. But I was beaten up to it by the Ghanaians who told me that they know as well. But in this future I go back, if we go back, so his failings, I can put it aside and forgive him because they were ordinary. His vision is superordinary. His action was extraordinary. His spirit is my guide and should be our guide. Thank you.
Two questions for the topic of the future of Pan-Africanism. Yes. Actually, I think it was interest here. Okay. You can see.
A comment and a question. Let me begin the question first. Is there any reason why you're going for the Federalist solution rather than the unitary solution? That's the first question to you. The comment is this, about Nkrumah's achievements. I've always said that Nkrumah's greatest achievement, you forget about all the infrastructural development, African unity, and so on. Nkrumah's greatest achievement was to give us Africans that self-belief that we could forge our own future, to determine our own future, not depend on other people to determine our future for us. So for me, that's Nkrumah's greatest achievement.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. My name is Muyabi. I don't really have a question. I just wanted to say that what the brothers here said is really, really important. I'm from Congo, so I speak, my mother tongue is French, right? You're from Congo? Jamaica. Well, that's the same. Africa, right? That's the same. We're all Africans. And I just wanted to say that us, the people, we have forgotten that. We need to enter politics. We need politics to change things. So what the brother is doing, I think, is the right thing. We need to do politics, to enter the political area. It's really, really needed. And I'm a member of an organization which is based in French-speaking countries. Unfortunately, because that's another problem, you have French-speaking countries, Spanish-speaking countries, English-speaking countries, and we don't communicate. But the thing is, in all these African countries, problems are the same. In Jamaica, same problem, same mentalities. In Ghana, in Congo, same mentality. So we need to work together. So that's another thing we need to do, to work together. So do some politics, and well, don't be afraid of politics. And yeah, so what the brothers were saying, now what we're doing. I'm going to ask this question. So you're a member of, you're the head of an organization called Pan-Africanist Federalist Movement. I'm a member of an organization called Pan-African League, Umoja. And how do we work together? I mean, I would be interested in meeting you and doing something together. Because obviously some of us are more Nkrumah, should I say. Some others are follow more Du Bois. Some over Thomas Sankara, etc. But we have one goal, which is to unite the continent. So how do we work together? Don't be afraid one more time of politics. We need politics, really. We need politics. Don't be afraid of politics. Without politics, we can't do nothing. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, you want to? Okay, we'll take one more.
Hello, everybody. I think it's fair to say I only came here for about an hour. I've ended up overstaying, giving a lot of excuses to my wife of what I'm still doing here. But I must say, I think both brothers and what you said, I'm new to this whole movement and incrementalist and the whole, I think the whole vibe and the energy that's almost starting to spring off. It's almost like this spring shoot that's coming up. And I actually started from Grandma Maisel, who has introduced me to a very lovely conversation during actually christening of her grandchild that we got talking, and that's how I got involved. I must say, I think both perspectives are very interesting. I think you have one side where you have almost reminiscence of Nkrumah, and the way Nkrumah just talking about action, it's time to act now. And on the other end, you have almost philosophical approach to this whole thing, and how we can do it in a measured approach. I think what is important that we need to factor in is that Africa is a big continent with over 2,000 ethnicities, right? Nkrumah had the idea to unify Africa. That is no mean feat. I don't think anybody has ever done that on that level and scale. And I think one way that he actually started, as far as I'm concerned, at least in my opinion, very humble opinion, was just to start small. And almost, it's like a spark, give that spark to let the whole of Africa see what Ghana was doing. And as he attained independence in Ghana, as also most of African countries also began to see that spark. And I think it's really important that even though we're thinking massively, and we're thinking, you know what, Gargantuan is a massive scale, we also should not forget that the main reason we are actually fighting for this is for the people. Now, the people need to eat. The people need to school, the education, and so forth. The things that matters to the people, we have to speak to the people. Right? It's all well and good when we're talking about the ideas on Nkrumah and everything else. I think you mentioned that, how do you bring the young people into it? That's one aspect. I don't think at the moment, any Nkrumahist at the moment is doing it very well. And over the past year, and since I met Auntie Maisel, I've been looking through. There's only a very few, right? I think it's time to bring the young people to engage the young people more. They're fascinating stories. I mean, like I said, I went to visit Auntie Maisel, and I've talked so many times, and I've sat here with goosebumps in terms of achievements and accolades that can be had. But it's time to bring the young people, and the question is, how do we do that? And it has to be practical, and it has to be measured, and it has to move with a big more movement than that. Thank you.
Yeah. I was extending my hand, if you noticed, because I was just itching to give you the answer. And the answer simply is stay for a few more minutes, because we have something good coming for someone like you. Thank you very much, Professor Farr.
Let him give us an answer about the Federalist question.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. All right.
Thank you very much. I would touch briefly on everything that has been said. In relation to the Federalist idea or choice, rather than a unitary, stems from the fact that if you analyze the continent, you would realize we've got 55 states. And if we are to consider the other states outside of mainland Africa, the various islands, just so if they decide to join the union, we, after considering all the various forms, we came to the conclusion that a federation would be far more easier than a unitary state. But that said, it is a decision for the people of Africa. It's not a decision anybody can take. At the Congress, all the political scientists will be there, and they will come up with what they think is feasible for Africa as a continent. Besides, we already have an EU that is working towards that. But they say it's Agenda 2063. We can't wait for Agenda 2063. Some of us wouldn't be alive, and we want to see it. So it's easier to start from a federal point of view because the states already exist, and then work our way towards the distance. I'll just be brief about the young man said this. Yes, you are right with what you said, getting the young generation into Pan-Africanism, and that is exactly what we are doing when we talk about going back into the trenches. During the Nkrumah years, they had something to work towards because there was an agenda to liberate Africa. So it was an exciting period. So the people lived for something. But after their time, the continent sort of descended into something else. And it's carried on for so many years that this generation can't actually relate to the current politicians. So we think that if we reignite that vision, which is the unification agenda, it will draw the younger generation because we are actually doing it for the younger generation, not for us. And so on that point, we say they will have to eat, the education, and so on and so forth. These are all very relevant things, but they all come after unification. Even the form of education will have to come after unification.
Great. Let's give both of them a good hand. Thank you.